Welcome to Lecture 2 of Module 2 for EDD 918. And in this lecture, we're going to talk about the foundation of organizational studies. And as I mentioned in the last one, really focusing in on classical management theory. And the reason for that is, I hope you'll see this as we go along, while we still, I think it's a little easier for us to see the connection to human relations, human resources, that kind of thing. That we still talk about motivation, rewards, and we want to inspire people, all of that. Whereas it's a little bit easier for us in our brains to disconnect from classical management, from scientific management, because we tend to think of it as belonging in the factory or the industrial setting. Whereas I hope what you'll see is, as we go through this, that there's still a lot of impact from that way of thinking that plays into our organizations and actually is part of our organizational structure even today. So I'm going to start just by saying, and I said this in the last lecture, classical management was heavily influenced by the Industrial Revolution. Well, why? Because what we have is, and I think I mentioned this as well, we have four primary issues going on in the Industrial Revolution that led to the study of management. By the way, this is one of my fun hip pocket trivia things. Management, the word management, as far as being related to organizations and business and things like that, did not come into use in the English language until the early 1900s. Well, why? Because we didn't need to before. But now, looking at the slide here, we have large groups working together. The individual farmers, the individual workers, like I mentioned the last lecture, our furniture guy, right now, or a furniture maker, all of a sudden, all these guys primarily at the time, men, were in the factory together. And how do we, so we have large groups, and now they're working with machinery that they haven't worked with before, and it's expensive machinery, and, they were used to working with hand tools, and now we've got all of this. Well, how do we do that? We want to increase the pace of industry. Money plays a role. We want to make money, and the more widgets we produce, the more money we make. So how do we increase the pace? And so companies are looking for answers on these things. So that led to then certain individuals starting to study this. And with that, they kind of had these three questions going on. How are we going to organize all of this? How are we going to maximize our productivity? And how are we going to manage all of these people and bring all of this together, right? So those are kind of those pressing questions. And I think you'll see as we go through these slides how they tried to at least go about answering them. So my next slide there, I call it the big three. By the way, I call them the big three. If you Google big three of classical management, I don't know if you get these guys or others. There's others I could have mentioned, but these are, to me, kind of the most influential. So as you look at it, kind of going stair step down, the first guy there, the first gentleman, is Max Weber, if you will, Weber, German guy. His contribution was bureaucracy. We're going to talk about each one of them as we go along. And then in the middle, we have Henri Fayolle, a Frenchman. Weber was more in the government kind of side, which makes sense with bureaucracy. Fayolle worked in the mining industry, and so worked about and his focus was about kind of mid-management and really defining what does management do. And then the third gentleman there, Frederick Winslow Taylor, an American, and his focus was on time and motion and efficiency, what we call scientific management. So we'll talk about each one of these briefly in turn. The first one there is Max Weber, or again, Weber, if you want to be very proper with the German. But as I mentioned, he brought about or instituted bureaucracy. Now, it is a little bit ironically humorous to me in that Weber's whole reason for bringing about bureaucracy was to improve efficiency within the governmental systems there in Germany. And I find that humorous because we tend to think of bureaucracy as synonymous with inefficient, right? We complain about the bureaucracy and bureaucratic processes and the red tape and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But his reason for this was to improve efficiency, because what he's trying to eliminate are those three things that I have there. Now, first of all, one was because he wanted to bring about what was then at the time traditional family-based hiring, meaning he wanted to eliminate the hiring of family members just because they were family members. Now, I'm not talking even here about like nepotism where the CEO's son, the hardest 2 hours of his life was the day he had to work lawn crew before being promoted to vice president. Not talking about that kind of thing. I'm talking about all kinds of workers, like a line worker. I'm a line worker and I'm working for this company, and I'm like, hey, my cousin Joe needs a job. Well, has your cousin Joe ever done this work before? Nope. Does he know anything about it? Nope. But he's my cousin. He's hired. And that was the kind of thing going on. So as a result, you had a lot of inefficiency, because if you had a family member and and the company needed a job, I'd just bring them in and they got hired on the spot. Now, we still have a lot of family members who work in companies, for sure. I've worked in several of those. But those family members have to earn their job, meaning they have to go through the interview process, or the application and the hiring and the interview, all of that, and they have to be qualified for the job to get the job. Now, you can put in a good word, that helps, but at the end of the day, they still have to be qualified for that job, but that wasn't the case. So he eliminated that. He said, no, we're going to hire based on skills and qualifications and everything else. Then not charisma based. That was particularly focused on leadership and management positions, because again, the best guys weren't being hired or promoted to those roles. It was kind of like, hey, you got a really good personality, let's bump you up the ladder. And so they were, but instead, so then you have the wrong guys in the wrong seats. And he said, let's eliminate that again. Let's look on skills and requirements and experience and those kinds of things. And then the last one there was, he wanted to eliminate particularism. Now, particularism, what it meant to them was this. Basically, it was bribes. And we still see this existing in some situations, I know, but the idea of a bureaucracy is to eliminate that. So if I want a permit, I have to go through the process just like anybody else. But with particularism, if I knew the guy behind the counter and slipped him an extra 20, 30, 40, 50 bucks, my permit gets bumped up to the top of the list. I'm guaranteed to get it in the time I want, right? So that was particularism. And Weber said, nope, we're not going to do that anymore. Same processes. So again, he's trying to bring about processes. And the idea was to bring efficiency and consistency. Again, just interesting that now bureaucracy has become viewed as inefficient. But originally it was intended that. But we see this in all of our organizations, don't we? We have processes. Sometimes the processes drive us crazy, but there's a reason for them. And so we want to make sure we have checks and balances. So that's what he contributed. The next one, so I'm not going quite in order of the guys on the slide here. So Frederick Winslow Taylor, he worked for Bethlehem Steel in Pennsylvania. And his main focus was, as I said, time and motion studies and efficiency. And he developed what became known as scientific management. And I said micro in view because he really drilled down on the individual worker. And in fact, probably his most famous was the study he did on the shoveling of pig iron. I believe he called it a highly valued man. It's been a while since I read his book. But anyway, what he did was, so Bethlehem Steel, they would have the pig iron brought in. Pig iron is just the raw iron, comes in big chunks that has to be shoveled. The train cars would dump it from where they mined it. Then you have to shovel the pig iron into the basically mining carts that are on tracks that then take it into the factory where it is, turned into steel through that process. Well, they hire guys to shovel the pig iron from that was dumped in the yard into the carts to be taken in. The problem was there was no uniformity in the way they did this. So most of the workers were German immigrants, a large number of them there in Pennsylvania, and they were farmers, but they also needed extra income, so they would work for Bethlehem Steel. But the problem was Bethlehem Steel supplied nothing, so these farmers would bring whatever shovel they had at home. So some of them are bringing giant grain scoop shovels, others are smaller, some are broken and chipped up, or the handle's broken off, and they're just doing the best they can. So some are shoveling gigantic scoopfuls and they're wearing out after 2 scoops. Others are almost like a little spade, trying to move all this pig iron. So Taylor comes in and he goes, we got to change this. And he studied the workers. He studied what they did. He studied the size of the shovel. He figured out the ideal size. He said Bethlehem Steel is going to buy all the shovels. They supplied the shovels. The men would check them out in the morning, check them back in at night. And there was a guy in the shed there who's looking at him going, this one's broken. It needs to be fixed. I'm going to give you a new one in the morning. So they made sure they have good equipment. And as well as he said, hey, some of these guys, the pig iron is so far away from the carts, they're having to walk so far. We're going to get consistent. Here's where the pig iron will be dumped. Here's where the cart is. It's the maximum effort as far as scooping, walking, dumping. He figured out break times, and you can work this long and then take a break because you then are more efficient for the long haul. So that's what he did. Now, I will tell you, Taylor grew to be a very hated man in the United States at the time. He had to testify before Congress and before the Senate. He was burned in effigy outside these hearings where he was testifying. The reason for that was because this was also the rise of the labor union time. But you got to remember, when you bring about efficiency, then that means you don't need as many workers. So the workers who were hired, who were these highly valued men, they got paid more money. So they liked it. But a lot of workers lost their job because you just didn't need them, because he figured out how to be more efficient with 5 rather than 10. And so that's why he grew to be rather hated by a lot of people. So anyway, so that was time of motion. But again, we see this in existence today. You see this in a lot of manufacturing industries. You have a movement called Lean Six Sigma. There's also from Japan, Kaizen, I think is how you say it. It's kind of that same idea. Lean Six Sigma has been applied not just in manufacturing, but also to kind of what we would call the office worker, and how to be efficient with forms and processes and things like that. Kawasaki has a manufacturing plant just a couple miles from my house. And I know a guy that works there, and he's gone to Japan to be trained in Kaizen, and that's like his job, is to make sure they're following the principles. So scientific management is still very much alive and well, but not just in manufacturing. It's also alive and well in other kinds of organizations, because it's about efficiency and processes and things. And then the last one that we'll look at here is Henri Fayolle. And again, Frenchman, worked in the mining industry there in France. And his kind of contribution was more or less, he created the job description for managers, if I can put it that way. And you see, he called it classical management. And it was, what should a manager be doing? Well, they should be planning. So they're planning the work of their unit, their department, their division. And then they organize that, divvying out the work to the different teams and groups. They command, they make sure they're giving the orders, the instructions, they're coordinating between the groups and making sure that's efficient. And then they control all of it as far as, I'm going to make sure the work gets done. So, again, Fayolle's contribution was, so what should a manager be doing? Because we have this new thing called a manager. And the manager's like, well, what does that mean? And he comes along and provides this. And we still see this happening today, right? This is basically the function of kind of a mid-level manager. So, like I said, I wanted to go through this because I want us to see, while it's called classical management, it's 100 years old or more, it still is working today. It's still at work, I should say, in our organizations today. And so what I have for you next is just 2 lectures for this module. But the next thing you're going to do is watch a video. It's a real quick. I think it's like 4 minutes long. It's a clip from an old Charlie Chaplin movie called Modern Times. That movie in particular was considered to be historically, culturally significant. I won't go into all that. But basically, Charlie Chaplin works in a big factory. You'll see that. And again, the classical management approach was kind of that. People are cogs in the machine. And you're going to see him being treated as a cog. That's what I want you to notice. So I want you to watch that, and then I have a couple of questions about what examples of classical management, scientific management did you see in the video, and then I ask you to think about what concepts of classical management, scientific management do you see in your organization that you're a part of, whether that's your job or maybe another organization you're a part of, and to engage in that. So you have 2 discussions this week. You have that one, then you have the reading discussion as well, and so look forward to engaging with you in those discussion boards.